Hello everybody, Justin from Playing Board Games here, and I am back with another one of these deck guides in this series that I have been having a great time doing. Today, we're looking at Agnes Baker with a deck that I'm calling the Absolute Psychopath, because I never built a deck around Meat Cleaver with Agnes. I never actually have, because the reality is it's kind of just a little bit bad. But I did try to make the most focused version I could that still I think is pretty functional, so why don't we dive in and check this puppy out. As always, there's some links to the relevant decks in the video description for ARKHAM if you want to check those out. So, Agnes Baker just finished work and needs to fight the Mythos, but luckily that means that she has her trusty Meat Cleaver with her. Everyone watches in fear as Agnes goes mad, chopping every threat she comes across to bits. Luckily, she also has a few spells up her sleeve to help balance out the chopping. The reason why it's kind of been a deck that people have used for Meat Cleaver for a long time is because it deals horror. And this works really well with Agnes Baker. Agnes Baker's whole thing is about turning just inconsequential pieces of horror, whether that be from your own card effects, like for example Ward of Protection, or Smoking Pipe, whichever one deals horror. I think whichever one deals the painkillers, they deal the horror to stop the damage. Or like enemy attacks and all that to be able to just like ping off enemies as needed. So that's where the Meat Cleaver works really well, and there's something called the Meat Cleaver, which we're also going to be talking about here. These are all the expansions required for this. It doesn't look like a lot, but it actually is a pretty good chunk. As always, these are just kind of like, there's always going to be a bunch of these. If you don't have certain things, consider to make adjustments. Certain things are necessary and required. But as always with this series, what I try to do is give you like a framework in which you can follow to potentially explore your own ideas from this. Let's check out the level 0 version of the deck. Notably, we do have an In the Thick of It, which I will cover what we're going to be taking with that for the trauma in a little bit. It might seem normal to take the mental trauma, but we want to have as much blue as we can, so we're going to be talking about why we want to take the physical trauma when the time comes. Notably, our upgrades that we're starting here with our 2 Branded Cthulhus and a Ghastly Possession. Astute viewers, like Astute Dunsparce, might know that there is a Down the Rabbit Hole here, which is the reason for those cards being in here at level 0, and also why we took the In the Thick of It. Going into the upgraded version, I put a bit more experience into this deck than I normally do. I normally try to do 29 experience, but we went a bit higher for this one, mostly because we have the Down the Rabbit Hole, so I wanted to have that come across in this. So why don't we dive in, check out the cards in this deck, and see what this whole thing is all about. First off, as I mentioned previously, this combo has been called Meat Cleaver by the community for a very long time, and honestly, it's a great name. I've never built a Meat Cleaver deck before, so I think this series would be a great time to do so. As I said earlier, however, I don't think Meat Cleaver is particularly great in Agnes, but Pete Sylvester always is. So I didn't want to rely on just Meat Cleaver. With that said, Meat Cleaver still has a purpose in this deck, finishing off enemies when we don't want to spend a charge on one of our attack assets. Healing horror, having an uncommon ping for Agnes' ability, and this is all helpful and a good flexible tool in our deck as we need it. Peter, of course, is also a banger in Agnes. Constant horror healing allows us to use more ping damage, which rocks. A few things. We're going to start with Peter. Peter is really nice in Agnes because it lets us use our ability more often. However, something to be aware of, the horror that you put on Peter Sylvester will not trigger Agnes' ability. Agnes' ability specifically names her, so you have to put the horror on her for the ability to actually trigger. With that said, Peter Sylvester is really nice with Meat Cleaver if we don't want to do the ping. So, looking at Meat Cleaver, it's a fight with +1, +2 Fisty if you have 3 or fewer remaining sanity, which admittedly is going to be a very hard level for us to get to in this deck. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But if it defeats an enemy, you heal the horror, which is really nice in Agnes. Like, just if you use this just to, for example, kill a rat or like a cultist, an acolyte, you can actually just heal horror, which means you're more use of your ability in the future, which is very comfortable. This is where Peter Sylvester and also Agnes can synergize with Meat Cleaver, and why the Meat Cleaver is a combo that has existed for a very long time. As additional costs to initiate this ability, you may take 1 horror to have this attack deal +1 damage. So with Agnes' ability, if you hit, you've dealt 3 damage with 1 attack. If you don't want to take the horror on yourself, you can put it on Peter Sylvester, which is really nice because both you and Peter are going to heal that horror. It seems janky. And it is. It is. This is a janky combo. This is what we would call a Johnny combo if we wanted to put this in the bin. This also is a little bit Timmy as well, but like being able to pay off from it is a very Johnny thing to do. So the question that I'm here to answer is, what can we do to make this a little bit spiky? I also got to like cover up this literal burning beam of sun that's eating up half the screen. All right. Both Living Ink and Cat Mask give Agnes a boost for her spells, which she doesn't need too much, and the Meat Cleaver, which we need. Please God, we need it. Living Ink, I chose to start with the brain boost, because our spells will appreciate the extra brain more before we level them up. This is the kind of the reality where the Meat Cleaver isn't going to be super functional in the first scenario, and I do think that while you could take the fist with Living Ink, I think the brain is going to do better for those spells that you're going to be starting with. Then, as we improve the spells, we also improve Living Ink to help with our Meat Cleaver attacks. The Vibrancy gives us more power, and Macabre Depiction allows Living Ink to live longer. So Vibrancy is going to give us +2 to our circled skills and -1 to each of the other ones. It's going to turn Agnes's brain into 7 and her fist into 4. Her book and her foot are going to go down, but luckily with Peter Sylvester in play, both the foot and the brain are going to get a boost as well. The Macabre Depiction is my favorite use of Living Ink. While we don't have ways to get charges on it, like we're not going to be like consistently drawing symbol tokens, if we are making a lot of actions or doing a lot of attacks, for example, we will likely draw symbol tokens to do this, and I really like it as an upgrade. Going to Cat Mask, while we don't have a lot of filling Cat Mask in this deck, feel free to add some if you want more use out of this. We do have boosts, we use it to boost carefully for our Meat Cleaver attacks as needed, and Cat Mask will provide some longevity throughout the scenario as well, due to Doom being placed on agendas, because a card, Doom being placed on an agenda is Doom being placed on a card for Cat Mask. Now, this is what I said earlier, how we needed to have some spells to ensure that our Meat Cleaver is more consistent. If you're building only around Meat Cleaver, you're honestly going to have a really bad time, so we still need to make a use of the Mystic spells that are really powerful. I chose two pretty straightforward ones here for this deck, Brand of Cthulhu because it's really powerful. It works really well with both In the Thick of It and Uncage the Soul 3, and not having to spend charges unless we hit means that it guarantees 9 damage. It also works really well against 4 health enemies, or 3 health enemies, because of the Meat Cleaver can finish off with that last little hit on it. The downside of this card triggers so rarely, so we don't need to worry about it too much, but it is something you should be aware of. If it hits, it's really bad. Like if it's your first attack and you hit with it, it's very bad. So just something to be aware of with Brand of Cthulhu, and sometimes it's worth it to overcommit just to beat that little bump that it might provide. Shriveling is a classic spell, especially for Agnes, because of her ability. Luckily, it's not direct horror, so we do have Pete to soak for it if we don't want to trigger our ability, but if we do want to like deal that extra damage, a Shriveling with a skull symbol, it can refill your Living Ink, can add an extra charge onto it if it's in play, and then it also can deal 3 damage, which is a really nice synergy to have, all things considered. Going on, in order to give our spells some more longevity as well, we're tapping into both Ghastly Possession and Uncage the Soul 3. Ghastly Possession works really well with the upgraded brand. It's half the assets rounded down, so it's going to get 4 more damage on the card, which isn't like terrible for one card. It's pretty alright. And Shriveling gives us more damage, so it's really nice. We're running it as only a 1-of. And the reason for that is because we're down the rabbit hole deck. And with this one, we are just going all in on upgrades because there's a lot of very viable things that you can do here with that. It's really nice as the 1-of to finish off the brand, just as like as I see it as the gravy on top of our delicious brand mashed potatoes in our level 0 deck. And this can also, if needed, triggers Cat Mask refresh in a pinch if you really needed to. With that said, I do think it works better at refilling your spells, but luckily we also have Uncage the Soul 3 to help us do that. Uncage the Soul 3 should be treated as a 3rd and 4th copy of Brand or Shriveling, depending on how it is. I would not use Uncage the Soul to reduce the cost to play a card for the first time, mostly because the level 3 version is here because of its ability to refill a spell that is already played, and it allows you to then save the cost on it there. So you eat the initial cost and have this be another version of those spells, and it's very powerful. It's used like that, especially on like your Shrivelings or your Brand of Cthulhu. It's very good for those sorts of things. Keeping this going, we got Forbidden Knowledge here. Forbidden Knowledge is classic in Agnes for a reason, and it has the potential for lightning bolt damage during multiple player windows and also acts as drip economy. This works really well with Peter Sylvester if you don't want to take damage, but you still want your economy. So The thing about Agnes's ability is that it is a lightning bolt. So sorry, no, that this is a lightning bolt, but the thing about Agnes's ability is that it can happen in any phase. So once per phase, if you take a horror, you get to put it on an enemy. This works really well with Forbidden Knowledge because, say for example, an enemy with 1 health moves into your location. Before it can attack you in the enemy phase, you can exhaust this, take a horror, kill that enemy. That is a little bit of like a dream situation for that to happen, but just trust me, having a horror that you can, like damage that you can deal out when you want to, is very nice for Agnes Baker. It may be a little spicy, but this plan is to take 2 damage with our in the thick of it, in order to get our Drain Essence in our deck active as early as turn 0. Drain Essence should be really easy to get off. We're missing a word there. Drain Essence should be really easy to get off and heal us that damage. Additionally, we don't want to eat into our sanity pool with much more than we go, because we want to have as much use of our ability as possible. If this is too spicy for you, I highly suggest changing it. You could cut the Drain Essences from your deck. You could take that into Horror Trauma instead. The reason for this is that maybe you want to like build around your Meat Cleaver even more. You could put like Overpowers in here because Overpowers do actually also synergize with Brand of Cthugha. But what's really nice about this thing is that it just works on turn 0, which is really nice for Drain Essence. Again, it is a little bit spicy, so I understand if it's not your preference, but just something to consider. You do have some horror healing built into your deck in the form of the Meat Cleaver, but I would rather have as much Agnes juice as I can get, considering we're going to be pinging ourselves as much as possible to try to get that extra damage out. Fearless gives us horror healing. Yay! That means more use of our ability. It also means we don't need to rely on Meat Cleaver for all of our horror healing, which is a plus. Now, this might sound like I'm dunking on Meat Cleaver a lot, right? And I am. Even though, like, it is kind of the nature of the deck, I'm just, like, my spike sentiment can't escape the thought process that you need to have, like, some sort of realistic expectations for what Meat Cleaver can do, right? You need to have contingency plans for when you eventually hit a 4 health enemy and you're looking at your Meat Cleaver and you're like, this just doesn't do enough. So I'm dunking on it, but again, the focus of this deck was try to make it as a package work inside of a deck that can also then like do other things and use kind of the Meat Cleaver or the Peak Cleaver as a value engine. So just some things to consider. Guts 2 is a great card in the Mystic class because Mystics love using their brain and they also lack good consistent card draw. Guts is often an early upgrade for me when it comes to these decks, just because it helps me dig towards my experienced cards faster, which I really enjoy, and just Promise of Power is just a really, really powerful skill. Whew, we're still going. This one's a doozy. There's a lot of cards to talk about, but we're having a great time talking about all these Mystic staples. These are 2 Mystic staples for a reason. They don't require much explanation. They're good preventative cards that offer you some security during the Mythos phase. I will say that Deny Existence is really nice, especially for taking that 2 trauma. You can hold it for any scary Mythos cards that might deal you extra damage. Luckily, you also have Ward of Protection in that to offer further prevention in case you're put in a situation where you draw a Mythos card you don't want. Likewise, if you are playing with multiple players, getting rid, or if you're behind the 8-ball, Ward of Protection and Ancient Evil is pretty solid as well. Ward of Protection, as I also said, has that bonus of triggering Agnes's ability, which is really nice. If you're feeling brave, you can throw an Arcane Research into this deck as well, and use that to upgrade your spells even quicker. Seriously though, down the rabbit hole, an Arcane Research is a hell of a drug. It is a lot of trauma, but it's something that you can consider. Economy and card draw, all in one package. That's our good friend Emergency Cash 2 here. This ended up as a 1 in the deck, but it works really well with Down the Rabbit Hole. So you can cut Ghastly Possession, save the XP, and add another level 0 Emergency Cash in its place if you want. But I really like Emergency Cash 2. Being it replacing itself does a lot of value, and it became a lot more playable with Down the Rabbit Hole. So just some things to consider for your economy part of this deck. You might notice that there's not like crazy amounts of economy, but there is... The economy comes in like strange places with like Uncage the Soul 3 and Forbidden Knowledge and all that kind of thing. I've been touching on this card constantly throughout this video, but Down the Rabbit Hole shapes this deck quite a bit. There are multiple paths you can take down the rabbit hole, but this deck is not stepping outside of upgrading cards, so it's just positive value for us. Notably, there isn't anything wrong with buying new cards in this deck if you want to, but in our upgrade plan, we won't be tapping into that. This is something we talk about with Down the Rabbit Hole a lot. There's a lot of variety for like how you can approach this card, and pretty much all of it is actually pretty strong. You could go XP positive, like we are here. You could go XP neutral, and even going XP negative, if it means you get your spells and your stronger cards better earlier, you'll win more games of ARKHAM, which is where the true power of Down the Rabbit Hole lies, which is just like injecting a bunch of power into your deck. On to our upgrades here. This one's really finicky because you're going to have so much experience each time you upgrade that you can kind of like just pick and choose what's best. I do think that your priority upgrades are going to be Brandigathuga, Beater Sylvester, and the Shriveling. Just get like your core set, the core of your deck made up pretty solidly, and then you can kind of just upgrade the other stuff as you see fit. As always, I like to leave upgrade open. But this one is particularly more interesting and difficult to talk about because it's down the rabbit hole. So you could you spend 2 experience to upgrade your Brandigathuga, and then you have 1 experience, for your Beater Sylvester, right? And then you have some more stuff, so you might as well just use your living upgrades as like a rounder or like a guts. This one is a very kind of, you have to be very adaptive with how you upgrade with this deck because of all the extra experience you're going to be looking at with this one. And as you go further, you can do things like Fearless and more stuff like that. This is the deck. I mean, it's a Mystic deck, and there's some good Mystic staples in it. So overall, it's very, very, very basic. If you want to go harder on the Meat Cleaver, I definitely support it, right? You could play backpacks, because backpacks also work well with Down the Rabbit Hole. You're probably going to want, instead of the Ghastly Possession, then you're definitely going to want the Emergency Cache. You're going to want to run some more items that you can take advantage of, like maybe you're going to want like a 1 of Ritual Candles in the deck, so you can make those adjustments as you see fit. With this one, as I said, I'm a boring spike when it all comes down to it, and I wanted to build a Meat Cleaver deck that I could play, and just rather than building completely around Meat Cleaver, I have a deck that is able to take advantage of Meat Cleaver in those moments when I can truly make it shine for that horror healing. So it's less about taking the horror and more about, taking that, healing the horror so I can deal more horror on future attacks, or using my Forbidden Knowledge as an example. Yeah, pretty straightforward deck, all things considered, and I did have fun building it, and I hope you maybe are inspired by it. And if you want to go harder on the Meat Cleaver, I say go for it, but just be aware of the risks involved. We have one more investigator to go. After that, I'm going to be heading into Dunwich and continuing this series there. Thank you for your support so much. I've had a lot of fun doing this and trying to, it is harder with these older investigators, and I think the Dunwich investigators are going to be a little bit of a struggle to try to find a deck that I either haven't built, or exploring the card pool in a way that's new, or revisiting an old idea and tightening it, right? I think it's going to be tough for Dunwich, but I am looking forward to it. Jim I have a million ideas I haven't played. Zoe, I have an idea I'm already cooking with. But I have a really fun Wendy deck that's was actually, it's a different version of something that I saw Daniel from Quick Learner do in one of our patron game days. So I'm very excited to share that one with you all in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Huge thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel. You guys rock. You allow me to make these videos for you, which I really love doing. Thanks for watching. Have a great one. We'll see you very soon for Wendy Adams. But for now, have a good one. And as always, a GG's.